Okay, this lesson will be short and sweet. What it's about is switchboard isolation of hardware ports. If you remember, the previous lesson we isolated the Wi-Fi users from the LAN users, but we didn't isolate the LAN users from each other. Back in lesson number 18, we did that, but there's some inconsistencies with Windows 10. This method eliminates those problems. So the reason we want to do this is port isolation maintains the hardware offloading, whereas VLAN generation can't use the hardware offloading. So what that means is that the switch chip takes a lot of workload off of the router operating system when we use port isolation. And the next point of interest is that it takes place at layer 2, which is a MAC address layer. And because of that, it doesn't care about any IP address schemes. People can't fake IP addresses in their packets and get around your firewall. You can't get around this because it's a hardware level isolation. Also, you need to know that Ether1 is what connects us to the internet. So if you assign one of these isolated ports to Ether1, then you can still connect the internet, you just can't connect other things. And last but not least, if the Ethernet port forwarding override equals Ether1 only, then other Ether ports can't connect even when they have override to this port. So we're going to demonstrate that. There are some cons here. The cons are that the router config is not a port, therefore it needs its own firewall filter rules. And WLAN 1 is also not a port, therefore it still needs its own firewall filter rules. And last but not least, only ports can be isolated with switch 1. So let's get into here and take a look at it. In case that's confusing. This is our old fire rules from the previous lesson. Remember we had the Wi-Fi clients isolated from each other. So now we're going to isolate the LAN people from each other. So we come up here and we open up the switch window. Notice the switch is a switch 1, that guy, which we talked about before. And the ports, this port tab here is used when you want to configure VLANs. Like we said, VLANs eliminate hardware offloading, therefore they're not to be used when you don't have to. In our case, we don't have to. For home installation, we don't have to do all that. So instead, we're going to use the port isolation tab here. And you notice Ether1, if you try to override that, you can override it to anything. So we don't want to mess with that. We want to leave that alone. We do not want to do overrides on that. That's how we get to the internet. All the other switches we do though. So let's go down the line here. Switch 2. We forward override. We want to be able to get to the internet. That's for certain. And remember, that's Ether1. We can do the down arrow again. And let's say we want to be able to connect to Ethernet number 3. Say OK. So now Ethernet port number 2 can connect to Ether1, which is the internet, and also Ether3, which is the Ether3 port, whatever's on that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to activate Ether3. We're going to set him to Ether1 only. Now what we've done, we've broken this connection up here, this Ether2 forward to Ether3. It won't work anymore for the reasons stated up here. See if I can find it right here. If Ethernet port forward override is Ether1 only, then other Ether ports can't connect even when they have override to that port. I've done extensive testing to prove this. So we just now broke that Ether3 connection up there by having this Ether1 only. So you have to keep that in mind while you're going through here. If I wanted Ether2 to be able to talk to Ether3, I would have to add Ether2 to this one. So let's do that. Ether3, Ether1, and I also want to be able to connect to Ether2. And I say, okay, now these two machines on these two ports can talk to each other. They're no longer isolated. If we come down here, Ether port 4, we set him to Ether 1, and 5 to Ether 1. Now what we have is ports 2 and 3 can talk to each other, but 2 or 3 cannot talk to 4, and 2 or 3 can't talk to 5, and 5 can't talk to anybody. So that's how this system works as port isolations. Really quite neat because it eliminates any connectivity between those physical ports. So your machines are definitely isolated even though they're on the same router by using this switch port isolation. So you can play with this if you want, change some things, but this is how you'd allow 2 computers to talk on your Ethernet jacks, but the other 2 computers plugged into the Ethernet jacks cannot talk to anybody except the internet. So hopefully you'll find some use for this and make it work for you.